Welcome to Harry Fling Wrestling. I'm your host, Harry Fling. Here we're going to talk everything professional wrestling, all aspects of it, whatever's on my mind here basically. So let's get down to it. Today we're going to be rewriting Wrestlemania VIII from 1992. It's going to be a series of different WrestleManias we are actually going to be rewriting. So we'll start with this one here as I've had it in the books for a while. Anytime I have a few spare moments and I'm thinking about something wrestling related, especially if it's WrestleMania season, there's a lot of cards out there I thought they were great, but they could have been better in my eyes. So let's get down to it here. Now, if you remember WrestleMania VII, the previous year had 14 matches. Now, I know there's a lot of fans out there that like it better when less is more, so to speak, but I, on the other hand, like a lot of quantity as well as great quality. Maybe not quantity over quality or quality over quantity, however you want to say it, but I like a lot of matches at WrestleMania. I like a lot of matches on pay-per-views in general. I grew up during the Attitude Era for the most part, and we had 8, 9, maybe 10 matches on a B-level show. And I didn't think it was all that bad because there'd be a few hidden gems, even if it wasn't a match that was announced on the card that evening. So bonus matches can be gems. You just don't know. So anyways, WrestleMania VIII was live. It was Sunday, April the 5th. Of 1992 from the Hoosier Dome in Indianapolis, Indiana, and had a very long aisle, as you remember. It was in a stadium. It was one of the few years they went to stadiums. Granted, they go every year now. Back then, it was kind of a rarity. It was around this time Hulkamania was starting to fade out a little bit. You could start to hear some boos in the crowd. I think the fans were starting to get sick of the whole Hulkamania thing because it had been running wild since 1984. And I think at the time society was changing, getting a bit younger as far as we want to see some fresher faces. That seems to always be the case, though, in wrestling, so maybe it's not fair to say it here. But I think at that time, people were begging for change. You could just kind of tell by watching some of the shows around that time. Now, I didn't start watching till the summer of 95 at 6 years old. I'd have been 3, so I went back and watched stuff thanks to YouTube, obviously Peacock. Daily Motion's got some hidden gems there, so take your pick. So the main event, in my opinion, should have been the match of the century. Ric Flair defending his WWF Championship against Hulk Hogan. That really should have been the main event, not Hulk Hogan and Sid Justice like we got. Oh boy, was that a snooze fest. I was bored to death. Hogan and Flair. Flair was the biggest star of the NWA, leading into Jim Crockett Promotions and into WCW into the late 80s. Just about until the spring of 91, when he had an issue with Jim Herd, I believe, who was taking charge of the company as a whole. Jim Herd was an executive that butted heads with Ric Flair. Rick, as a result of this butting heads, was technically the WCW champion and physically stole the big gold belt, brought it to WWF television, which is a cardinal sin. You don't bring another company's world title and claim it as your own in a rival company. So for those that remember, they blurred out the world title visibly on television because WWF was afraid that WCW was going to sue them for that. So they needed to save face. And right after he won the Royal Rumble in 92, where the belt was vacated after controversial title changes regarding The Undertaker and Hulk Hogan, Flair actually won the gold, outlasting all 29 other competitors. Gave a very legendary speech with a tear in my eye. Well, I'll let you watch it. I don't want to ruin it for you. So anyways, this leads us to WrestleMania VIII. Hulk Hogan would have been the greatest challenger there because they actually teased it for so long, even during Hogan and Undertaker's feud. Flair would get involved surreptitiously with putting a chair in the ring at Survivor Series 91, so Taker gave him the tombstone. Then it was only a matter of less than a week, then Hogan got it back at that pay-per-view special this Tuesday in Texas. And Jack Tunney, WWF president at the time, decided that due to these controversial finishes, we should be Hogan gets stripped of the belt. I guess he did, everything was more fair play back then. There seemed to be more rules and regulations enforced more than what you see today in wrestling. So they tried to, I wouldn't say legitimize it, but they tried to make it feel as if you were in an actual organization where you had to abide by rules, regulations, policies, procedures, protocols, that sort of jargon. So, anyways, that's why the decision was made, and so Hogan and Flair would have played out nice. It would have been a predictable ending because of Hogan winning. So at that time, it probably, thinking back, maybe it wasn't a good thing that main event happened. I think there were a lot of factors that played into it. I know on the house show circuit, and especially those MSG house shows, the fan reception was kind of negative to Hogan and Flair. I don't think people received those bouts. Sorry, can't speak today. Those bouts were not well received. Therefore, people just lacked interest in Hogan and Flair on the house show circuit. So they thought to themselves, well, what makes us think that they're going to have a better match on the main event circuit, let alone the main event of WrestleMania? So I think that's why the decision was changed there. And then, of course, Hogan, there was the steroid trial. We were in the midst of that at that time. Hogan was the biggest abuser of steroids. Doesn't matter what he tells you in the media. Just look at his body. How old is he now? He's going to be 72 in August. So, he's really off his rocker these days. Hulk is. But if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be here talking about wrestling. So there's that. There's something to be said about that. So Hogan would have won, and that just would have extended his career, because then he took a hiatus after WrestleMania VIII to go film Thunder in Paradise and a couple of other things. So that would have been the main event, and then I think the next top-tier match following that one, now this isn't, when I'm talking about these matches, they're not going in any particular order. This is just in order of importance. I actually drew out a card, but I don't have it to show. I would have put Macho Man Randy Savage versus Jake the Snake Roberts in a steel cage match. Now, this feud, it started right after SummerSlam 91. Macho Man and Miss Elizabeth tied the knot. Now, my family was there for that. I was 2, so I couldn't go. So I stayed home with a sitter. And, they got to witness an actual wrestling wedding that went uninterrupted. If you go back and watch SummerSlam 91, nobody interfered in it. It went off without a hitch, just like that. It wasn't until an episode of Superstars, I think it was a little over a week later, they had a reception for Randy and Liz. Now, Randy and Liz were married in December of 1984. This wedding was just to further a storyline to help Macho Man get his career back on track as far as getting reinstated, because he lost that match to Ultimate Warrior, WrestleMania VII, career-threatening match, career-ending match, whatever the hell you want to call it. And Liz came in to save him from an attack from Sensational Sherry. She was the queen. He was the Macho King. So that alliance ended. Then he got back together with Liz. So Randy and Liz, they got married. It was also to give the pay-per-view a better buy rate from what I read. So maybe WWF was starting to struggle a little bit financially here as far as their popularity was starting to wane. So they needed that to kind of hook the fans back in. But that's not the only selling point. So anyways, what happened at the reception was Liz goes to open a gift from an uninvited Jake Roberts. Jake gives her I believe it was a mini King Cobra inside the wedding gift. She opens up the present, and then Jake taunts her with it until Sid Justice gets in there. God bless Sid. May he rest in peace. So as Randy and Liz too. Gosh, it's hard to believe how many of these guys are dead now. And Jake's still alive, but he's not doing too well. And Sid Justice and Randy Savage fended off Jake Roberts and his pet python there, his King Cobra. Now, I don't have the greatest knowledge of snakes, so forgive me if I'm not getting the names right. So that kind of started that was the spark that ignited the feud there. And then just a couple of months later, Jake has a match with a local amateur wrestler and then squashes him. Calls out Savage to the ring, who is strictly a color commentator at this point because he hasn't been fully reinstated by Jack Tunney. Then he ties Savage up in the ropes. The King Cobra bites his arm. Ooh, that's so graphic. Viewer discretion advised if you want to go back and watch that November 91 episode of Superstars of Wrestling. And we get to the point where he being Jack Tunney, our WWF president, reinstates Savage. They have a match, a one-off match at this Tuesday in Texas, which Savage wins and then continues the beatdown for obvious reasons. But then, stupidly, they decided to have them have a match at Saturday night's main event. This is when Saturday night's main event moved to Fox and had left NBC at that point. So that was actually the second to last episode, and then it was November 92. They had their final Saturday night's main event. And Macho Man defeated Jake the Snake to symbolically end the feud, but they really should have waited till WrestleMania. The feud was so hot and intense that I think they really pulled the trigger just a little bit too early. You could have waited until WrestleMania VIII had a steel cage match, because I think a steel cage match would have warranted this sort of thing. You know, it's kind of like in this day and age, you know, back when, I'll give you another example, Hell in a Cell, when that first started in the late 90s, and I was already watching and hooked by that point, they only used Hell in a Cell to warrant, you know, the end of an intense feud. You can't just use Hell in a Cell, steel cage, any old time you like it. You really have to wait for the right moment, especially when the feud climaxes. Otherwise, it doesn't mean shit. And that's just a perspective from a fan there. So I would have had Savage go over in this one. Then I think Jake was on his way out. He was upset with something backstage in the company. And, I think he wanted to be an announcer or producer, and Vince denied his request, Vince McMahon. And, it led to his exit. And Savage could have eventually won the world title sometime down the road. Maybe him and Hogan could have had a match at SummerSlam, but I didn't think that far to SummerSlam 92, so we're not going to go there. The next match I would have put down, let's keep going with this card, and this is because I didn't have anything better for these two. Undertaker versus Sid Justice. Sid Justice, as you know, main evented WrestleMania 8 with Hulk Hogan in a snooze fest. He also main evented WrestleMania 13 with Taker, but that's another Mania. We'll talk about it another time. Taker and Jake Roberts ended up having a match, and Taker was 2-0 at WrestleMania, if you're counting the undefeated streak now. Sid Justice turned heel because of Hogan getting the title shot initially, and then somehow it went to Savage, and then that's how Savage and Flair started feuding, and then Hogan and Sid Justice started feuding. So it was kind of a mess, really topsy-turvy if you think about it. But it all plays out. Go read Wikipedia or whatever if you want the information on what actually happened. I'm just talking about things from my perspective. These are my views being expressed here. So Undertaker and Sid Justice, I think I would have put them in simply because they didn't have anything better to do, and that's sad that I'm saying that. But at the same time, I think Taker would have eventually turned face and aided Savage in his feud with Jake Roberts. Justice would have just been another thorn in the side of Hogan, I think, at that time, as I think about this more and more. So somehow the two would have come together. I haven't exactly played that out in my head. Not a feud I'd get totally excited about, but you have to have them because they were semi-main eventers at this time, those two. They're in the upper mid-card, whatever you want to call it. Next, this match I would have kept the same. Roddy Piper defending his Intercontinental Championship against Bret the Hitman Hart. What a great match they had. They had the submission rule going at that time. Could have had a submission match, but that didn't quite come about yet in 1992. But the way Bret won it was great, and they shook hands after. It was the classiest Piper bout I ever saw. Piper never had the greatest of matches, but this is probably his best. I would have kept that. Also would have kept this match for the tag team, the World Tag Team Championship. Money Incorporated, The Million Dollar Man, Ted DiBiase, and Erwin R. Shyster, IRS, defending the gold against the natural disasters, earthquake and typhoon. Jimmy Hart recently started managing Money Incorporated around this time, and that was one of his last clients before Hart would leave the company a little over a year later, before he turned face and then managed Hogan and Beefcake. But that's WrestleMania 9. We don't want to go there yet. Jimmy Hart at this time was only sticking with Money Inc. because they were like his best champion. So Natural Disasters got the boot from Hart, as did the Nasty Boys later in the year. So Money Inc. was really a dominating force. Jimmy Hart was kind of a weird choice at first because he didn't seem like he quite fit, but it ended up working out for a little over a year maybe. This match, I don't know why it didn't happen, but it should have, because this tag team was even hotter than the other two, just because they've been in all promotions. The Legion of Doom, Hawk and Animal, they're the Road Warriors. I would have had them face off against the Beverly Brothers, Bo and Blake. Beverly Brothers were sort of a mid-card, maybe a lower-card tag team at that time. They were never tag team champions, but they got several title shots, but were unsuccessful. Legion of Doom, I don't know what the hell was going on. They were just in an interview segment that night with Paul Ellering and their puppet Rocco that they started bringing to the ring. Oh, what a dumb idea that was. They were actually feuding at that time. If you watch Superstars or Wrestling Challenge at that time, they were they did interviews during each other's matches. So I think that would have played nice as far as being a lower card Mania bout, just to see the LOD in action. There's no reason they should have had a match, but there was probably something going on with Hawk, I want to say, at that time, because Hawk had a lot of drug problems. Michael Hegstrand, his real name, an Animal, brother of John Laurinaitis. This is Joe Laurinaitis, and his son, St. Louis Rams, James Laurinaitis, famous family, if you will. So I think Hawk was going through some personal stuff, and I think that sort of hindered their push as far as getting another tag title was concerned. I think that's why they lost it at a house show abruptly to Money Inc., and Money Inc. hadn't even formed yet, so there was a lot of weird stuff going on with the tag team division early part of 92. This next feud really should have happened, but this is a fault of one man. This is Shawn Michaels versus Marty Jannetty. Party Marty. When will he ever learn? Marty Jannetty. Jesus, where to even begin with this guy? Shawn Michaels had the greatest career he could ever ask for. And he retired and went out with a bang. Just forget he ever came back at Crown Jewel 2018. Let's not even talk about that. The Rockers had just broken up. The barbershop segment had just taken place. Shawn threw Marty into the glass window. That was the end of the barbershop, both symbolically and physically. And that would have been a great match to have at WrestleMania 8. Now, they could have had more matches. That I wouldn't say those are blow-off, but that should have been their first encounter. Don't have them face off with each other. Maybe on the house show circuit you get away with it, but not on primetime wrestling or Superstars or Wrestling Challenge at the time, or Saturday Night's Main Event. Marty got into a lot of legal trouble. I think he was under house arrest at that time. I don't know if he had a domestic situation or had something to do with drinking. He probably had a DUI, and he was involved with a lot of drugs. Rockers were both party animals in the 80s, so they did a lot of cocaine, whatever drug they could get their hands on, pills and such. Marty, unfortunately, never got clean. He tried, but unfortunately, it gets to a point where you can help somebody. You can only help them so much until they themselves hit rock bottom and say they want to receive help. And if you go watch Dark Side of the Ring, the world according to Marty Jannetty, they can better illustrate that point than I can. But that's why this match didn't happen. Marty was under house arrest. The company they basically just fired him. They let him go. They wanted nothing to do with him, and rightfully so, until he himself got clean and finished his house arrest. And then he came back in little bits and spurts, but there was always something to cause Marty to depart the company so abruptly, just like that. And Shawn, on the other hand, was skyrocketing to the top. So Shawn ended up facing El Matador, Tito Santana, in a great opening match. It was good. It wasn't the greatest, but it was good enough for what it was. But Michaels and Santana, well, Michaels always admired Santana. I know there's a lot of respect between the two. There's nothing going on as far as a feud, so this would have hit home so much better. Now, some other great matches. This one I would have kept the same. Tatanka versus the model Rick Martel. They'd go on to have another match with more meaning in November of that year, Survivor Series 92, where Martel stole Tatanka's grandfather's sacred feathers from the Lakota tribe, I believe. So here it's one of those situations, nothing better to do, like the LOD and the Beverlys, or Undertaker's to Justice. This match I would have kept that the same, Tatanka going over, and then the Shawn Marty match I would have had Shawn go over, because I would have had that one continue. I had Legion of Doom win the Beverly Brothers bout. And Money Inc. and Natural Disasters would have had Money Inc. somehow retain or had a shitty DQ finish. That match, you could get away with it there. Sorry, I haven't been giving away the winners here, have I? So Tatanka over the model. 8-man tag match, Hacksaw, Jim Duggan, Sergeant Slaughter, Big Boss Man, and Virgil. I would have them go over, which means win, against the Mountie, the Repo Man, and the Nasty Boys, Brian Knobbs and Jerry Sags. That was a quick match that was used as an excuse to promote their upcoming Family Feud episode, the WWF appearing on Family Feud. I think Ray Combs was in that match. He was a special guest celebrity that year at WrestleMania 8. And Ray Combs made some jokes about the heels. And then it was a 5-minute squash for an 8-man tag match. So it's fine. Just get these guys on the card and that's it. Don't make it as shitty as the Core and Big Show, Kane, Santino, and Kofi match from WrestleMania 27. That match should have done better, but we'll talk about that another time. And rounding out the card with some singles and tag matches. This match should have been on the card only because I feel bad for one of the two men involved in this. The British Bulldog versus the Berserker. Berserker was played by John Nord, longtime journeyman from Minnesota. He lives in Montana and owns an auto body shop. He's been long since retired from the world of professional wrestling. British Bulldog was responsible for this match not happening. Apparently, there were time constraints. I didn't think time constraints would have happened in 92. They went from 4 hours the previous year, 91, to 3 hours in 92, I think. Not sure why that happened. So anyways, they would have had to either drop that match or another match, which we'll talk about next, Owen Hart and Skinner. Bulldog said, I don't do 1-minute matches. Skinner, who was just waiting because thinking his match was going to be dropped with Owen Hart, said, I do. So Bulldog Berserker gets dropped, Owen Skinner happens. I would have had Bulldog go over in this one. Just a quick power slam. Not much going on here. Berserker only won his matches via countout. He was from Iceland, so he was a Viking. Carry his sword and his shield and go, Huss! Huss! So he'd win his matches by throwing his opponents over the top rope and letting them get counted out. So Berserker was really not a major threat to a lot of the baby faces. He was a lower card heel. He'd probably get mid-card at best, so that's about it. He had a few IC title matches against Bret Hart. Nothing more than to write home about. Owen Hart and Skinner, that would have been a real big squash. That only lasted about 1 minute and 30 seconds, if I recall correctly. Had Owen go over because his career was on the rise, and Skinner, he'd already had a career, I think it was in AWA or something, or Deep South, one of those promotions. Forgive me if I'm getting the names wrong here, but this is a little before my time. So yeah, Skinner was a gimmick of an alligator hunter. He kind of lived out in the Florida Everglades, and he would skin the alligators alive with his sharp knife, his pocket knife. That was his whole gimmick. So there's really no feud amongst those two matches. I would have Bulldog go over in his and Owen go over in his. Same with these last three matches here. We have the Dragon. This is Ricky Steamboat when he was in his Dragon gimmick versus Big Bully Busick. I would have loved to have seen this match only for the sake of them being at WrestleMania, but by this point, both men had left the company in, I think it was October or November of 1991. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat didn't like just being a fire-breathing dragon, simply named the Dragon. I met Ricky Steamboat in 2013, and he told me he did that trick with kerosene, with the fire trick, with holding some kerosene in his mouth and then spitting it out right at the right time to ignite the flames to create the illusion he was this living, breathing dragon. So he didn't like it. People were stepping on the tail in his large-ass costume backstage, and he just thought it was overdone. And this is, the overly gimmick time period of WWE. So everybody had a job. Everybody had a job description, had a gimmick of some sort. Big Bully Busick was just what the name implies. He was a bully. He looked like somebody straight out of the 1800s. He had a bowler's hat. He had a thick mustache that kind of curled up like the Blackjacks had, or maybe Simon Gotch of the Vaudevillains. Always carried a cigar. He popped the kids' balloons at ringside. That's what a bully would do. Including Bobby Heenan's daughter, who even mentioned in her dad's DVD, Bobby the Brain Heenan, that she was the recipient of him popping those balloons. Just a little fun fact there. Not that it really matters. Yeah, I'd probably have the Dragon go over this one. El Matador versus Colonel Mustafa. Colonel Mustafa was the Iron Sheik. He was in the Triangle of Terror when Sergeant Slaughter was doing his Iraqi sympathizer gimmick. Slaughter had already won his country back by joining forces with the Americans in wrestling. So he abandoned his Iraqi sympathizer gimmick after his feud with Hogan had ended. So Colonel Mustafa was just hanging around along with a real Iraqi in General Adnan, because Iron Sheik was Persian. He's from Iran, so he's playing a gimmick of a country he's not even from. So go figure. General Adnan was just there. He had a long career. He's already long since retired, so he's just a manager. So I probably would have had Mustafa go over in this one. Matador was always... Tito Santana was pretty much jobbing by this point. As much as I love Tito, I don't think there was much gas left in the tank. There's enough momentum going for him around this time period. And then our final match of the evening, but not the main event, would have been the Bushwhackers versus the Orient Express. Much like the LOD and Beverly Brothers, there were some talking head interviews in each other's matches, so I think they would have had a nice coming to a head here. Let's see, I probably would have had the Orient Express go over because I've already had so many faces win. You got to give the heels some wins too. Maybe it could have continued. Mr. Fuji would have gotten involved somehow. Fuji was also Berserker's manager, but I think his Orient Express were his more prized pupils at this time before his real prized pupil arrived later that year in the form of Yokozuna. So anyways, these 14 matches, let me know what you think. And, I don't have the time with a full-time job and other things going on in my life to recreate these matches on 2K and create superstars. I don't have that time, so I'm just going to talk about it. It's much faster. But let me know what you think in the comments below, and stay tuned for another episode. Later.